Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast. I'm one of your hosts, John Puma. I'm from the Sake Notes, also the administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord, and the lead mod at Reddit's r/sake community.
And I'm your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake samurai. I'm the director of education at the Sake Study Center, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Well, hello, Tim.
Hello, John. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I've noticed we are in the midst of our series that has yet to be named, where we talk to people who have had experience working at Japanese sake breweries. Now, Tim, who is this man that is in our Zoom?
I am so excited to welcome our friend Keith Norum. He's the Director of International Sales at Masumi Sake Brewery from Nagano Prefecture. Now, John, you and I have featured Masumi, and we've talked about Nagano several times on the podcast. And when we decided to start a series where we interview people who've worked at Japanese sake breweries, Keith's name popped right to the top of my list.
He might be like the second or third person we mentioned, I think.
Keith, am I allowed to laugh now?
You are totally allowed to laugh now.
Keith, we are so excited to welcome you to Sake Revolution. And welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Well, thank you, Timothy. Good to see you. John, what a nice surprise and what a pleasure and an honor to podcast with you guys. I'm really excited. And thank you for asking me. I'm sure there are a lot of very interesting sake stories out there, and I'm not one of them. I'm one of the more boring, stories, but at least you get through those and you can go on to more scintillating.
Scintillating. Oh my goodness. I don't know what kind of show you have going on here, Keith.
I'm happy to fill the air with some stories and that sort of thing.
Wonderful. We're very glad to have you.
Before you fill the air with stories, Keith, I have to fill the air with one of my stories. I want to go back in time to the first time I ever met you, Keith Norum. I looked it up. I went to the deepest, darkest archives of urban sake.
Oh my goodness.
God.
I found the first time that I encountered you. It was at Sakagura Restaurant here in New York on May 15th, 2006. This was less than 1 year.
May 15th, 2006?
2006.
Yes.
Wow.
I had my first drink of sake about 1 month before that.
Yeah. And I had my first drink of sake about 1 year before that.
Yeah.
But Keith was doing a Masumi night at Sakagura Restaurant, and you had Nasutoji
I
with
thought
you.
that was the time. When you mentioned Sakagura and May, I was thinking that might have been the first time that Nasutoji and I visited New York City. Was that right?
Wow.
That was the first time
That is
for
right.
them.
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember saying goodbye to you, shaking your hand, and saying to you, gosh, how do you get to do what you're doing? Like your job of traveling and introducing sake, just from that point in my sake journey, sounded like the coolest thing in the whole world. And here we are all these years later. And I just wanted to let you know that I think of that moment regularly, and you are such an inspiration. And it was just such a fun memory. And it was fun to reread that blog post today. I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, really? Okay. That was before Snapchat, so things don't disappear.
Things do not disappear on Urban Sake.
The age of blogs. I remember those days fondly.
Exactly. Well, Timothy, that's so kind of you to say that and to remember that. I also remember meeting you there. I just didn't remember the year. It's funny how the pandemic has messed up pretty much everybody's recollection of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I can never place anything properly anymore. But I also remember meeting you, and I remember you mentioning that you're doing a blog about sake, which I was fascinated to hear about. And so I felt like, wow, these guys are really into this. They're not just messing around in sort of a fun night with some strange alcohol. So I was really impressed from the very beginning.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize you guys went back that far. I met Keith at the end of a Joy of Sake event with very fuzzy memory because it was the end of a Joy of Sake event.
Oh yeah,
But I
exactly.
think that my wife Michelle had met you earlier in the night or near the end of it and was like, "You have to," she came over to me. She's like, "You got to meet Keith." Came over. I'm like, "Who's Keith?" And she's like, "This is Keith." And you introduced yourself, and I was like, "Oh, I love Masumi. This is
Yeah.
great."
Good on Michelle, but she's typically she's on it and goes, okay, well, if I don't get John over here, he's going to be totally blotto and it won't happen. So she got you on the leash before that could happen. That's good.
Yeah, she's good like that.
Now, according to my extensive research,
Uh-oh.
Keith, you joined Miyasaka Brewery, makers of Masumi, full-time in June of 2005 as the head of overseas operation. Can you give us a quick summary of how you wound up in Japan and how you connected with Masumi?
That's a tough order. Quick is the hard part. Okay. But well, first, how I ended up in Japan. I actually came to Japan in 1990. It was still bubble time in Japan.
Yeah.
And I had stepped out of graduate school and decided not to pursue the academic career that I was in graduate school for. And I had a really, really important reason to go to Japan instead. Partly work. Japan was booming, and so there were plenty of opportunities to find something to do there. Mm-hmm. And I was also married to a Japanese woman, wonderful woman, Michiko. We were married in the States, and I felt it was time to turn the tables. So there were two W's. There was work, and there was a woman involved with my decision to move to Japan in 1990. Very shortly after we moved to Shizuoka, because that's where her family's from. Mm-hmm. And we were looking around for work here and there, both of us. And I decided to pick up the phone because I remembered from my school years, this company called Epson, which was making a lot of inkjet printers. And it was right at the time when like the Macintosh desktops, computers, and all of these things were really starting to come into the market. And so everybody needed a printer. Mm-hmm. And I happened to know that they were a Japanese company. Not a lot of people knew that. So I picked up the phone, called them, didn't know anybody. And I think it was partly fate, partly just pure luck. The person who could speak English to me, who came on the line, had graduated a year before me from the same university. And had been hired by Epson to start finding non-Japanese people to work in Japan for them.
That is serendipity.
Yeah. And she even asked me, she said, "How did you know?" And I said, "I didn't know. I just picked up the phone." And before I knew it, I had moved from Shizuoka to Suwa in Nagano, because that is the global headquarters of the Seiko Epson Corporation. I say Seiko because Seiko Watch Company actually had a big hand in creating the Epson printer company. And they merged into a single corporation in the 1980s. So before I knew it, I was in heaven, Mountain Heaven Suwa, working at a giant company. And I was on the 5-year plan, which I threw out the window about 3 years later.
Wait, so hang on. What is the 5-year plan?
Well, a 5-year contract, and then you go home.
Okay, so you're just it's a one and done kind of thing.
And I very quickly realized that no, I don't think I'm going to be going home. And so I stayed. So that brought me to Japan, and then it brought me to Suwa. And years ensued. And during those years, I met the Miyasaka family just as friends, just as people in the neighborhood were fascinating and very warm and open, wonderful family. That's where I encountered the sake of Suwa first, was through the Masumi branded Miyasaka family. Little did I know that he had ulterior motives in asking me to come to barbecues.
Aha.
So after 11 years, I decided to leave Epson, and we started a small company to outsource a human resources function from Epson. So we had our own little business. And that's when the Miyasaka family, actually the current president, Naotaka, knocked immediately on the door and said, "Hey, you guys are free now. Can you help us?
Hmm.
So that was in 2001 to 2.
Mhm.
And we said, sure, it'd be great. And in about 4 years, we realized that having a small business can be very up and down. So
Yeah.
having my wife, Machiko, take that and me working full-time for Masumi made sense for both companies.
Mhm.
In 2005, as you mentioned, Timothy, I made the jump directly into Masumi as their overseas operations or sales person. So that's how I ended up with Masumi. That wasn't quick, but I guess it was quick enough.
It's efficient, I think. Thank you for sharing. Now, I think that our second question is probably going to be a little bit simpler, and it's one that we ask of all of our guests. So, the short version would be like, how did sake happen for you? When was the aha? When was the like, oh, this is something special kind of moment for you?
The very first time I encountered sake is something I remembered because I was in West Virginia at the time. I was working for a daily newspaper in a place called Elkins. And this was in the 80s, and there wasn't much in the way of Japanese food in Elkins, West Virginia in
Yeah.
the 80s.
I'm wondering
There
where
was-
the sake came from.
Well, there was, however, a Chinese restaurant on the outskirts of town, and I was having dinner with my brother. And we decided, oh, look, they have sake. What the hell? And so we ordered a carafe, and it came out, I kid you not, it had a Chinese, very clearly a Chinese dressed woman on the picture on the bottle. And it had an umbrella stuck in the top.
Mm.
That's
And
an
then-
80s Chinese restaurant right
Oh,
there.
oh, wow. And it was forgettable sake, to be honest. I don't know what it was. They didn't even mention the brand. I don't think that they knew the brand. And so that was a typical 80s encounter with sake in rural America.
Yes.
Years after that, honestly, the first time sake really became a thing for me was shortly after I moved to Japan.
Mhm.
It was in Shizuoka, and we were with family and, eating and all this kind of thing. And they brought out kaiun from Doi Shuzo, and it was so good. It was just so fresh and clear, and I took a double take right there at the table, because I was expecting another, umbrella in a bottle or
Yep.
something, and this
Yep.
stuff was just really nice. And I went, gee, I better have another look at that. And it wasn't so long after that we moved to Suwa.
Nice.
And
Nice.
just like any big corporate organization, they have a lot of drinking parties after work that are obligatory. So it's kind of like work. And at some point in the evening, they would trot out either or both chilled sake and warm sake. And almost always it was a collection of the local sakes. It was some from maybe Koten and maybe Mikozuru and Masumi and Honkin. So it was always a mix of local sake. It was mostly standard level futsushu, and it was really good. It was just nothing like I thought sake could be. So after that, well, I was hooked and into it, and I was curious about it. But I must say, I didn't become some kind of sake maniac. I did not suddenly do a huge deep dive into the sake pool. I was just there, and it was part of your daily life, and there were plenty of other things that occupied me. So I wasn't sort of transformed into some kind of sake evangelist overnight. It wasn't like that.
Well, you've been working with Masumi Brewery since 2005, and we'd love to get your perspective on working for a Japanese sake brewery as a non-Japanese person. You've been with the same brewery for a long time now, and we'd love to hear some of the challenges or some of the things that have really surprised you in a positive way about working for a Japanese sake brewery as a non-Japanese person. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Okay, here we go. I'm going to watch the time on this one. But no, really, honestly, because I'd already been in Japan quite a while before actually joining or working with Sake Brewing Company, I didn't have the kind of real big culture shock that a lot of people do when they move to Japan and just start jumping straight into an industry like sake. Timothy, you could probably speak more about that kind of thing than me,
Yes.
given your experience with Hakai-san and all that. So I didn't experience that kind of culture shock. The beginning with Masumi was very positive and very pleasant. We had already been friends. We were karaoke friends. We'd go to Thai restaurants together and whoop it up because they had a karaoke room in the back and stuff. So that part of it was really enjoyable. And also very positive. The shift from kind of dealing with big corporations in the tech area, like Epson and Canon and so on, to working with Sake Brewery. One of the most unexpected pleasant things was the company was so open about what they do with other makers. They didn't have a lot of secrets. And in the tech industry, like everything's a secret. And there's an NDA for everything. And you just, but the Miyazakas had lots of other brewers who were their friends and had personal family relationships. And they were sharing all this really important information, technical information about what they do and problems that they'd solved and so on. And it was just such a breath of fresh air that people were so open and so supportive of each other. So I think that was one thing that hit me quick, and it's always stayed with me. It's one of the wonderful things about this industry.
Can I ask you one really quick question before we move on? Did you, when you started working at the brewery, did you do any production training, or did you always have more of an office sales marketing job?
Good question. And it was always in the office. I had training in the sense of, well, it's best if you know how this works. So it was training in the sense of so that I can explain things better. But there was never a point where they said, we're a little short in manpower. Can you come over and help us carry rice around or do something? It was never that kind of situation where I was needed in the brewery to help actually produce the sake. And that's fine. I mean, I knew that I wasn't going to be in that kind of capacity anyway. So I never felt left out of that. And again, some of the people that I brought in were just there for a day.
Yeah.
But there were opportunities with other producers, for example, a beer maker from Norway, No, and he spent a month in there.
Wow.
We had a winemaker from Denmark, and she spent almost the same. It was about 3 weeks because she wanted to learn for her own professional use, the techniques of fermentation. And so at times I really was allowed to stay in there every day for months at a time. So that was great too.
Great. Cool. I think it is time that we stop dancing around the issue and start talking about and sipping some of the delicious sake.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Timothy, what have we got today?
Well, we asked Keith which sake from the Masumi lineup he would like to taste with us and feature in this episode. And we landed on the Masumi Shiro Junmai Ginjo. Very dedicated listeners of Sake Revolution will know that we featured this sake back in December of 2023 in episode 161, which was our brand profile of Masumi. So we've tasted this before on the show, but we are so excited to taste it with Keith together. Keith, would it be all right if I rattled off the stats for this sake for our listeners?
Please do.
All right. So again, this is from Miyasaka Jozo in Nagano, brand name Masumi. One of the key features of this sake is its lower alcohol content, about 12% alcohol, and the rice polishing ratio is 55% remaining. And this features Miyama Nishiki and Yamada Nishiki. Our SMV is -3, and this features the world-renowned Kyokai No. 7 yeast, which is also tied to Masumi, and an acidity of 1.5. So there you have it.
All righty. Thank you, Timothy. And I'm so glad you rattled it off because there's always minor changes.
Ooh.
Yes.
And so you mentioned Kyokai No. 7. Yes?
Oh, yes,
But
I did.
Yes, he did.
Actually, Masumi now does not use the Kyokai. Kyokai means society, brewing society, or brewing association. But we, over the course of the last 10 years, have been working very hard to step away from buying the No. 7 yeast, Kyokai No. 7, from the brewing society. For the longest time, even though that yeast was first discovered and identified at Masumi, Masumi had been buying it back just like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it was 2018, we finally made the switch to our own versions of the number 7 yeast family. We invested heavily in yeast development, a laboratory and researchers. And so now we have our own proprietary Masumi number 7.
Well then.
So what we do is we wanted to keep the number 7 name. So we just changed the association to Masumi. And there you go.
All right. So we've got it in the glass.
Let's take a smell. It's very, very gentle, light aroma for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I always like about Masumi stuff is that the aroma is always very distinctive. There's a little bit of like, when I have something from Masumi in my glass, I'm like, this is a familiar aroma to me.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a signature to me in my mind, which I think is like really interesting. I don't think there's a lot of sake that has that.
Thank you for mentioning familiarity, John. That's something people often talk about it as a feeling of comfort. There's something comfortable about the aroma and the overall taste profile of Masumi. And I think that's true. It's something that people become very comfortable and familiar with. It's something that makes them feel at home. I should mention that the milder type of aromas are part of the characteristics of the number 7 yeast. Number 7 can be produced in a way, when you use number 7, of course, your production methods can do a lot for aroma. So there are certain makers who use number 7 from the association, society number 7,
right,
who do some incredibly aromatic things with it. But as far as its base, if you're just going to use it without doing anything particularly fancy with your technique, you're going to get mild aromas. You're going to find a kind of array that covers some of the bright spots in some other yeasts, but not at the volume or intensity of those yeasts. For example, number 9 and number 18 are really good at very bright, intense fruits, but they are some of the fruit characteristics you get are white fruits like pears and apples. You find those in number 7 as well, but they don't come out at you with the intensity or the brightness that you find in those yeasts. Number 7 also produces the aromas that are more rounded and very soft banana. And, the aromas of banana are very warm and comforting, not sharp, not bright. And so you get this interesting balance between some of the aromatic spectrum that you see in other sakes.
Let's give it a taste.
All right.
It's so lovely. It's very soft, gentle, but there's notes of like apple peel and green apple on the palate that are really charming, really lovely. But one of the main focuses of this particular sake is to take a lighter approach. Is that right, Keith?
That's right. In fact, I think the very first time we met, already this kind of sake from Masumi was in New York. And I think we might have even tasted it that evening at Sakagura. At the time, it didn't have this name. It wasn't called Shiro. It was part of a second brand, a family private reserve brand called Miyasaka. And it was in there, and it was called Miyasaka Yawaraka Junmai. And the English name on the back of all the Masumi bottles, you have this really cool English title for them, and it's Sake Matinee.
Yes.
Yes.
And the point was it's 12% alcohol. And obviously it's going to come off lighter. It's going to come off in a different way than a lot of sakes do. The first point to doing a sake at 12% was from a chef in Japan who was complaining to a president that he does a lot of lunchtime corporate dinners with people from all over the world. And he's a Japanese chef. He does beautiful Japanese food. And people ordering, Sauvignon Blanc and Chablis and stuff. And because they're afraid that the sake is going to get everybody drunk and then they can't have their afternoon plan.
That's completely reasonable concern.
Exactly.
For an afternoon of drinking when you're having something that's like, 16, 15% alcohol. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's where it started. But very quickly, we realized, partly the market made us realize that it's not just something for lunchtime. It's a sake that was waiting to be had. That a lot of people outside of Japan, especially, who haven't encountered much sake, do feel the alcohol very forward in sake.
Mm-hmm.
They can have a really bold red wine that's about 15% alcohol and a sake, which is usually 15, and they'll always feel the alcohol stronger than sake. So giving them an option of having it at 12 so that they're not put off or distracted by the feeling of alcohol and they can actually feel the sake more broadly. It was something that helped them get into the sake house and start exploring. So it turned out to be just a wonderful sake in that application.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're describing it almost like a gateway sake.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, just in terms of our export share, we're right now at about 15% of our total sales per year are export sales, meaning not in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So 15%. So most of the products that we export, if you compare the percentage of sales of that product, it's around the same. So maybe 20% of a product is sold overseas and the rest is in Japan, typically.
Mm-hmm.
This product that we're having, Shiro, 50% is overseas and 50% is in Japan.
Wow.
It is that much of a special product to overseas. Be careful. We did not make it for the overseas market. We made it because some guy in Tokyo said, come on, can't you do me a sake that's a little lower? But the result was that. So that, I think, says it all, really.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
So when we were setting up this interview, Keith, we asked you from the entire Masumi portfolio, which sake you'd like to feature and want to taste with us. And you chose this Shiro, this lower alcohol sake that you've been describing so eloquently. Why did you choose this out of the Masumi portfolio to taste with us today and introduce to our listeners?
Good question. And the obvious answer is, you guys said it has to be a sake that's available in America.
True.
And it has to be a sake that people can sort of reliably find if they're in certain urban parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And partly the story that I told about it, the fact that it's been in the market as a 12% alcohol Junmai Ginjo for a very long time, and that its popularity is clear.
Mm-hmm.
I felt this was the best one to help people actually go out and try it right away, but they'll probably be able to find it. It's also the one that I mentioned, comfort and home. This is often the sake that ends up being in our refrigerator because we're just at home. I'm not going to do a giant tasting of sake every night. I'm having dinner and I want a sake that's not going to knock me off my chair, but it's going to go with the food. And my wife and I are going to enjoy our conversation and our meal. And this is the one that ends up being the one in the refrigerator a lot. That's why.
Now, if people want to learn more about your work or learn more about Masumi, where can people go online and discover more?
Well, one is just, if you just Google Masumi sake, then pretty quickly you'll get to our English website. And although I know websites are kind of passe and everybody's into the SNS thing and all that, honestly, just as a base, go to the website. And it's fairly deep. It goes through a lot of things. Obviously, it talks about our products. It talks about the history of the company. It also talks about how sake is made in quite some detail. So it's there as a resource. And you can just, nibble at that as you go along. We do have a couple of Instagram presences. There's the main one, which is just Masumi. If you put Masumi sake or something in, you'll get the Japanese one. I must say, though, just as a parting note, I am now a sort of special situation employee because I'm over 60 years old and I've been turned into what's called the shokutaku. That means that I'm, yes, a shokutaku. And it's a special situation for older companies in Japan often do this. So I turned 60 and they retire you and then they rehire you. So I'm a retired, rehired employee and I'm doing about what I did before. But
okay,
it's just, it's one of those things.
All right.
And we do have finally a new guy who's helping, and he's going to be working more and more in international sales based in Seoul. He's not a Japanese guy. He's from Hong Kong originally, but he spent most of his educational years through high school and college in London.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Hugo Chan, and he is going to be doing more and more with for example, the Instagram and this kind of thing, as well as just the typical international sales work that we do. So you'll be seeing a lot of him, and you'll probably see more Instagram thanks to him.
I had the pleasure of meeting Hugo earlier this year, Joy of Sake.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's wonderful. And Keith, I've seen a lot of really amazing YouTube videos featuring you talking about the brand and the sake. So there's a YouTube channel as well, isn't there?
That's right. Thank you for reminding me. The reason I forgot was we did that during the pandemic. We had a video company that did those YouTube things for a while.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they were a lot of fun. Thanks to the video company, it would come in and set it all up and do them. And honestly, they were a lot of fun for me too. But unfortunately, that relationship had a sort of ending point too.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the last several years, at least I haven't been directly involved much with the YouTube thing. I would like to get back into it in some way or another, but it just hasn't happened recently.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you and have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us, Keith.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure and honor. Thank you guys for asking me on, and I'm sure that this conversation will continue as we go along.
I hope so.
Can't wait to have you back again. All right. Well, in addition to Keith, I also want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in for each and every episode. And a special hello and shout out to all of our patrons. For those of you who would like to support Sake Revolution, we do have a Patreon, and we appreciate our patrons so much. They make Sake Revolution possible. If you'd like to learn more about supporting us on Patreon, visit patreon.com/Sake Revolution.
And if you were inspired earlier when Keith corrected us on the yeast to use in the sake, and you have other corrections, maybe did we mess something up? Is there something that you need to tell us? Is there a way we can make this show better? We want to hear from you. We want you to reach out to us. The email address for that. And if you thought websites were old, email. You can email us at feedback@sakerevolution.com. You can also just get at us on Instagram, Sake Revolution Pod. We will thank you for your kind words, and we'll get back to you. Now, with that said, everybody please raise your glass. Remember to keep drinking sake and
Kanpai!
Kanpai!